The deed was nothing but a folded scrap of paper in his coat pocket, its ink smudged in the corner, as if even the man who wrote it didn't care enough to keep it neat. Elias Carter had paid a single silver dollar for the shack it described. 1 coin for 4 walls, a roof, and a place far from the noise of men. He rode alone through the cold. The world narrowed to the rhythm of his horse's hooves. The trees grew taller, darker, older. The deeper he went, branches reached across the path, like the hands of strangers. He'd never meet again. Snow lay in broken patches, crusted over with ice, the color of old bones somewhere. A hawk cried sharp, quick. And then gone. Elias had no illusions about the shack. He'd seen enough of the world to know that for $1 you don't buy comfort, you buy quiet. You buy the absence of other people's noise, and quiet was all he wanted. Now the war had left its fingerprints on him, not just the scar across his ribs, but the way his eyes moved, always scanning. Never resting too long. He'd buried friends whose laughter he still heard when the nights were too long, worked for ranchers who never learned his name, stayed in towns where his bed was softer than his welcome. He wanted no more of that, only a place where the world could pass him by without asking for anything in return. Mid-afternoon. The path narrowed, until it wasn't a path at all, just a clearing between 2 lines of fir trees, and there it was. The kit leaned like it had been listening to the wind for too many years, roof patched with sheets of tin that winked dully in the pale light, a chimney leaning slightly to the left, like an old man with a bad hip. The door sagged, its hinges rust-brown and tired, but there was something else too, a thin ribbon of smoke curling from the chimney into the cold sky. He slowed his horse. That smoke meant someone was here, and it wasn't him dismounting. Elias kept his steps slow. No sudden moves. The way you approach a stray dog that might bolt or bite the air. Smelled of pine and something warm. Faint, but real bread. Maybe his boots crunched over frozen ground. The shack's door gave a long, low sigh as he pushed it open. The inside was small, the ceiling low enough that he felt he ought to duck. A table by the window held a loaf of bread, still cooling, steam faint in the chill air. A cup sat beside it, the tea inside still warm enough to blur its rim with mist on the hearth. A fire burned steady. This was not the home of someone who had just arrived. This was lived in. He called out, his voice deep but calm. No answer. His eyes drifted upward, to the small staircase in the corner, and there she was, a girl, though not so young as to be a child. Standing halfway up the stairs, her hair was long, a dark curtain tangled from wind and sleep. A shawl hung loosely around her shoulders, frayed at the edges but wrapped tight, as if it were armor. Her feet were bare. Pale against the wood, she looked at him without flinching. Her gaze steady, but unreadably. Elias spoke again. Softer this time. Nothing, not a word, not even the shift of her mouth toward speech. The silence between them stretched. It wasn't the empty kind. It was the kind that seemed to fill the air like a mist. You could feel it on your skin, but you couldn't push through it. Her eyes held something older than her years, as if she'd been waiting in that quiet for far too long. He took a step back, palms loose at his sides. He told her he didn't mean trouble, just wanted a roof over his head in the warmth of the fire. Still nothing. She didn't run, didn't hide, just watched. And then, with the slow, soundless movement of a deer stepping back into the trees, she turned and climbed the remaining stairs. A door closed softly. Above, Elias let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He could have left, gone back to town, demanded an answer about why his dollar had bought a home already claimed. But the truth was, something about that quiet, watchful face had reached into him, pulled at some place he thought he'd boarded shut years ago. He set his saddlebag down by the hearth, pulled off his gloves, and felt the heat sink into his skin. The bread sat there, unguarded, but he didn't touch it. Some lines you don't cross, even if you've paid for the ground they're drawn on outside. The wind shifted, carrying the first scent of snow to come. He would stay the night tomorrow. Maybe she'd speak, or maybe she wouldn't. Either way, the shack was big enough for 2 people to keep their distance. But in the small hours, when the fire had burned low, Elias thought he heard the faint creak of the stairs, and the next morning, A mug of coffee sat waiting for him on the table, hot, strong, and wordless. Winter came down hard in those woods, the kind of cold that made the world feel smaller. Trees stood with their arms bare and stiff. The sky a gray lid over everything. Snow fell most days, not in storms but in slow, endless drifts, soft enough to bury sound. Elias settled into the shack, as if it had been waiting for him all along, and the girl, she was there too, moving like a shadow that knew every corner by heart. They did not speak, yet they did not ignore one another. Either he rose early, sometimes before dawn. Two split logs in the clearing, the axe biting into the frozen wood, sent a sharp echo through the stillness. By the time he carried the armful inside, the fire would already be cooked into a low, steady burn. He never saw her start it, only knew that it was always lit before the cold could reach the walls. Meals appeared without asking, sometimes a plate of cornbread, sometimes stew, steam curling up in the dim light of late afternoon. She would set the food down and leave before he sat to eat, yet when he looked closely, he could tell she paid attention. The stew grew thicker when the wind was strong, the bread fresher on the days his work kept him out longer. In return, Elias began leaving firewood stacked neatly inside the door each night, and once, when he noticed her shivering in the morning, he left his spare blanket folded on the stair rail. The next day it was gone from there, and 2 pairs of socks lay in his drawer. Handmen dead. Her silence was not empty, it was its own language, one of careful gestures, of small offerings traded like secrets. The nearest town lay 7 miles east, a ride Elias made once every fortnight for flour, coffee, and whatever nails or tools the shack demanded. That was where Mrs. Abernathy found him the first time. She was a woman with more years than patience. Her bonnet pulled down low against the wind, she eyed him over her sack of feed like a crow, sizing up a new object in its nest. "So you're the one in that old garrison shack," she said. No question in her tone was told. "You paid $1, for it seems fair. The roof's half tin, and the floor's half holes." Elias grunted, which seemed answer enough. She leaned closer. "You seen her yet?" He stilled, not wanting to give her the satisfaction of surprise. Mrs. Abernathy didn't wait for his answer. "They found her 3 winters back, not far from there. Girl wouldn't speak then, and far as I know, she hasn't since. Parents gone. Folks say she saw something, though no one's certain what. Maybe the sort of thing that steals the words right out of you." She looked at him hard then, as if weighing whether to say more, but she didn't, just took her sack and shuffled off, leaving him with the taste of her words like iron in his mouth. When Elias returned to the shack that night, the snow was falling, heavier than before inside. The girl was sitting by the fire, mending a tear in her shawl. She didn't look up when he entered. Yet he thought, her shoulders tensed, just barely. He wanted to ask about the story Mrs. Abernathy had hinted at, but the look on her face told him the question would be like forcing open a locked box. So he said nothing, just sat on the other side of the hearth, letting the crackle of the fire fill the air between them. Days passed, and their quiet rhythm deepened. One evening, Elias was at the table mending a saddle strap, humming without realizing it, some low, wandering tune his mother used to hum. When the night was long, the sound must have reached her differently than his voice did. She paused in her sewing, her head tilting just enough to catch the melody. When he stopped, she didn't look at him, but her hand lingered in midair, as if listening for the rest. Later that night, he found a scrap of paper, folded on the table. The letters were small, but neat. "Thank you." It was the first time she'd given him words at all. The snow grew heavier with each week, pressing the world into a kind of hush. It made even small things feel important. The scent of bread, the creak of the stairs at night, the warmth of the mug she sometimes left near his tools. Elias began to understand that her silence wasn't a wall meant to shut the world out completely. It was more like a fragile glass she kept around herself, transparent, but easily shattered. And somehow, without speaking, she had let him stand close enough to see through it. One night, the snow came down in thick, fast flakes, the kind that blurred the trees into white shadows and muffled every sound inside. The fire glowed steady. The girl sat with her back to him. Her hair spilling over the shawl, he could see the flames reflected in her eyes. There was no fear there, only a deep, quiet watchfulness. Lias realized then her silence wasn't emptiness, it was protection. A way of keeping something precious from being touched by hands that might not be kind. And somehow, in that small shack in the middle of the winter woods, he made a silent promise that whatever had taken her voice, he would never be the one to take her safety. The first sign came after the thaw began. The snow still lay in pale drifts against the trees, but the paths between them were softening. It was a small thing at first. A set of boot prints near the shack that didn't belong to Elias and weren't Hurst's. They came from the tree line, stopped just shy of the porch, then turned back to deliberate to be a wanderer, too close to be harmless. Elias noticed them in the gray light before dawn. He followed the trail into the woods, just far enough to see how it skirted the clearing and disappeared toward the ridge. Whoever it was, they knew the land well enough to move quiet, and that made him uneasy. In town a few days later, he heard the talk, men leaning against the blacksmith's wall, spitting tobacco into the mud. You hear that mute girl still up in those woods? One of them drawled. Don't know how she's still breathing after what she saw. What did she see? Someone else asked. The first man's voice dropped. They say it was Reddick. You remember him? Slipped the hangman's rope in Santa Fe, headed north. Folks say he shot her pa and ma right in front of her. She was hid under the floorboards. Saw his boots, his face, everything. A third man laughed, low and ugly. Guess he's still looking to tie up loose ends. Elias didn't linger to hear more. The names and details were secondary to the feeling settling heavy in his chest. He'd known from the start there was something holding her silence in place now. He knew it had teeth that night. The wind was restless, scratching the trees against the roof. She was by the fire again, mending a scarf. Her fingers moved slow, steady, the yarn catching the light in soft loops. He wanted to tell her about the tracks, about the talk in town, but he knew that too much truth at once could be as dangerous as not enough. Instead, he asked, gently, if she'd been near the porch 2 mornings back. She shook her head, eyes not leaving her hands. The scarf was finished a few nights later. She didn't hand it to him, just left it folded by the door where he'd see it before heading out. The wool was thick, the stitches tight against the cold. When he looped it around his neck, it was as if some part of her had chosen to stay with him while he worked outside. Then came the second sign. It was near dusk when he saw it. A thin column of smoke rising from the ridge beyond the creek, too far for a trapper's camp, too close for comfort. He watched until it faded with the falling dark that night. The air inside the shack felt different, not colder, not warmer, just sharper, like the quiet was waiting for something to break. He lay awake, listening. The faint creak of the stairs came just before midnight. Light footsteps. Hesitating halfway down, he sat up slowly so as not to startle her. Her shape appeared in the dim glow from the fire, shawl wrapped tight, hair loose down her back. She stood there for a long moment, as if gathering something from the air between the man. Then, her voice small, cracked, almost unfamiliar in the space. Don't let him take me. It was no louder than a prayer, but it struck him like a gunshot. All the same, the sound hung there, trembling in the air, even after she had gone back up the stairs. Elias didn't move for a long time, letting the words sink deep. Her silence had been a wall, and she had just placed a single brick in his hands, trusting him not to drop ETH. Banked the fire, and sat watch until the first light seeped in from the east, and when the morning came, he went out to check the tree line, his rifle slung over one shoulder. The forest felt too still, as if listening back that day. He carved something from a scrap of cedar, a small bird with outstretched wings. He left it on the step outside her door. No note, no explanation. The next morning, the bird was gone. In its place was a single pine cone, dusted with frost, set where he would see it as soon as he rose. It wasn't much, but in that quiet exchange, a promise was made. The danger wasn't far now, and neither of them could pretend otherwise. Elias woke to the smell of smoke, not the gentle curl of pine from the hearth, but a thick, bitter stench seeping through the cracks of the shack. He rose fast, rifle in hand, and saw the orange flicker dancing against the window pane. The edge of the woods was burning, not wild, not accidental, set with purpose, the flames crawling low along the underbrush, coaxed closer by men who knew what they were doing. He shook her awake gently, whispering her name, though he still did not know it fully. Only the one he had carried for her in his mind. Willow. Her eyes flew open, fear sharp and immediate. There was no need for words. This time she understood. He grabbed his coat, the scarf she had made him tight at his throat, and opened the door. Smoke rolled in thick and acrid through it. He saw them, 3 shapes at the tree line, their torches spitting sparks. One of them stood broader, taller, with the kind of swagger that came from long years of cruelty. Girl clung to Elias's sleeve for a moment, then let go. Her face was pale, but steady. They slipped out the back, into the dark. Moving toward the creek, the woods were a maze of shadows and smoke. The fire hissed and cracked behind them. The men's voices carrying low and rough through the trees. Find them. One barked, "She ain't getting away this time." Elias kept her close, his hand guiding her shoulder as they moved. Every step was a prayer that the snow would cover their trail quick. A gunshot split the night. Bark exploded from the tree beside them. She gasped, stumbling, but Elias pulled her down low, pressing her against the frozen ground until silence returned. Then they moved again. Faster now, toward the creek's silver ribbon, gleaming under the moon at the water's edge. Their breath came sharp in the cold. The creek was frozen thick, the ice black where it met the current beneath. Elias turned to her, speaking low, steady as he could manage. "You cross here. Don't stop. Don't look back." But she shook her head fiercely for the first time since her voice had returned. She spoke more than a whisper. "No." Together. He met her gaze, and in it was something stronger than fear, a courage born not of safety, but of choosing not to run alone anymore. The crack of branches announced them. Reddick stepped into the clearing, his rifle slung loose, his grin wide in the firelight behind him. The other 2 flanked him. "Shadows with guns." "Well," Reddick drawled, voice rough as gravel. Little bird finally crawled out of her nest. "Thought you could hide behind this quiet man, did you?" Elias raised his rifle, slow, steady, no words, just steel in his stance. Reddick chuckled low. "You can't keep what ain't yours." The standoff hung in the air, heavy as the smoke, then sudden as lightning. Reddick fired. The shot tore through Elias's shoulder, spinning him back. He staggered, pain blazing hot, but his rifle fired too, and one of the shadows crumpled. Gun falling silent in the snow. The girl cried out, not in fear but in fury, rushing to Elias's side, her hands pressed against his wound, her voice spilling urgent words, breaking open after 3 long years of silence. "Stay with me, please. Don't leave me, you promised." The sound of her voice gave Elias strength enough to rise again. Reddick advanced, sneering, rifle raised for the final shot. Elias gripped his axe, the weight of it solid, true. When Reddick stepped onto the ice, Elias swung with all he had left. The blade struck the frozen surface near the outlaw's boots. The ice cracked, loud, a jagged roar echoing through the trees. Reddick cursed, stumbling back, and the ice gave way beneath him for a moment. His face twisted in shock. Then he was gone, swallowed by the black water beneath the frozen creek. The current dragged him under before his scream could finish. The last outlaw turned and fled into the burning woods, leaving only silence. Behind, the girl knelt beside Elias as he sank to the ground, her hands on his face, her words tumbling fast, broken. "Alive, you're bleeding. Stay awake. Don't you dare close your eyes." He smiled faintly through the pain. "Your voice." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but her grip on him was strong. "It's yours too now," she whispered. And in that moment, the fire behind them, the smoke rising, the creek whispering cold, Elias realized that her silence had not been broken by fear or force. It had been broken by trust. The townsfolk, found them at dawn. Jonas, the blacksmith, said nothing cruel this time, only took Ilias's arm and helped him walk. Mrs. Abernathy fussed over the girl, wrapping her in blankets, muttering about a voice returned to where it belonged. Weeks passed, and the shack stood again, stronger, its roof patched, its walls mended, Ilias's shoulder healed, slow but sure, and the girl no longer only. A shadow moved freely through the space. Now her laughter came soft at first, then stronger, like a creek breaking through winter ice. One spring morning, Elias stepped outside to find her kneeling in the soil near the porch she was planting. Flowers. Tiny bright things that lifted their faces to the sun. She hummed as she worked, the same tune he had hummed once while mending leather, and when she looked up, her eyes met his. Without fear, the silence between them was no longer a wall, it was a bridge, and maybe that's the truth of it. Friends, sometimes the voice does not return because the world demands it. It returns because someone makes the silence safe enough to break so. Tell me, from where in this wide, wide world are you listening to this tale? Tap the heart if you believe kindness still changes lives, and let me know in the comments. If you had bought that shack for $1, would you have stayed?